Welcome to Climbing the Immune Ladder, Steps for Success in Science, IISIAR podcast, the show where we explore inspiring experiences in science and the untold stories shaping our community. Today, we will be your hosts, Janine Lückgen, Senior Scientist at University Medical Center Ljubljana in Slovenia and Visiting Scientist at University Hospital Erlangen in Germany, and Salma Rizo-Téllez, Postdoctoral Fellow at University of Montreal, Canada. In each episode of this second season, we will dive deep into conversations with experts on innate immunity in sterile inflammation, autoimmunity, and their resolution to bring you insights, ideas, and inspiration you won't hear anywhere else. Whether you're tuning in during your morning coffee or while you're doing your lab bench work, get ready to learn, laugh, and see the world from a new perspective. Let's get started. Today's expert is Professor Georg Schett, Vice President of Research and Chair of Internal Medicine at Friedrich-Alexander University Erlangen-Nuremberg in Germany. Thanks for joining us and welcome to our podcast, Georg.
My pleasure, Janine. Thank you for the invitation.
Could you perhaps start by briefly introducing yourself and your career trajectory?
Yes, I am currently a professor of internal medicine at the University of Erlangen, which is actually a large university in southern Germany. And I am more or less a physician scientist, I would say. So I'm interested in how diseases work and how to better understand diseases, but I also see patients. So the patients always help me to shape the science, and the science helps in the way to improve the patient care. So why do I do that, right? I think at the end it's based on that you face a good teacher. And I was in medical school in Innsbruck, Austria, I met a professor, Georg Schett, who is an immunologist, and he made a very nice lecture on immunology, and I really liked that. And I remember after one of his lessons, I went to him and said, "Can I work for you?" Right, and it was about to do a thesis in his lab, and then I basically went a year into his lab and worked on immunology of atherosclerosis, because that was a time when the atherosclerosis was very much seen as a lipid disease, right? But there was a lot of inflammation also known, and then I started to do a thesis there, and that brought me actually to science. And this Professor Georg Schett actually stimulated me to go into science, and so I learned skills to how to work in a lab, and I learned certain technologies. And when I started then my medical education as a doctor in Vienna, I knew quite a lot of technologies already to do science. So I could combine science and medicine quite well. And that helped me, I think, over the time. And I stayed in science in a way. So I always saw medicine as a scientific discipline, right? Not just following a cooking recipe, how to treat the patients, but actually change treatments and to try to make it better and to advance medicine. So I think that was basically, in a nutshell, what I experienced. In 2006, I went then to Germany, where I became chair of a department. And since then I do that. I also, as you mentioned, I became vice president research of the university, which is in a way reflecting that I'm always interested in research and look a little bit over the frontiers and the borders, and looking also at other disciplines in research, which is quite interesting, I think.
A fascinating trajectory. And currently, you are pioneering the use of CAR T cells and T cell engagers for autoimmune diseases. So could you tell us a bit more about your research and advances in the field?
Yeah, actually, this came also from a clinical observation, right? Sometimes you have patients who are really very critically sick, and the established treatments don't work, and this is particularly in larger hospitals where you actually see these patient centers, and then you try to find solutions for them, right? And we came up with the idea that when you basically could abrogate all the B cells in the body of a patient, you could probably interfere very deeply with autoimmune disease. And that's actually what we have done 5 years ago. It's actually now really 5 years ago. In the end of March 2021, this young lady, we were quite desperate, I think, with her. And she was also desperate, of course, because of a intractable lupus. And we treated her with a single infusion of CARs, which we manufactured actually in our hospital. So it was really our own product. And she's now still completely healthy after 5 years, right? And this was an eye-opening moment. And I think it has been now reproduced all over the world. And we are very happy that we went this way. I think it was an endeavor, right? Because we didn't know whether it works. But I think it was worth the try. And actually that changes then, I think, conceptually how to treat the disease, right? And she's now doing really well. I mean, it's 5 years after this infusion. She stopped all the drugs. She lives a normal life. She has no autoantibody, no lupus anymore. Actually, she has no disease. She's a young lady. She can enjoy her daily life. She studies, and I think she can study much better also, which is also very nice. So the disease not anymore present. And I think this is really something which made us very happy, right? It was also very important for the team as an inspirational experience, which then actually moved the team ahead to do other diseases and new patients, right? And I think that's what we need. We need always inspiration and some new things which we can follow and discover actually new frontiers. I think that's very important, and this moment was very decisive, I think, for the entire department, I would say.
With the CAR T cells, I'm wondering how difficult it was to implement this new approach. Regarding regulatory hurdles, did you face some problems when you wanted to apply this for the first time?
Yeah, I think it was not easy. It took a lot of discussions, I think, among the specialists and with the patient and with the family of the patient, right? To go this endeavor, there was also a risk in it, right? Like cytokine release syndrome or cytokine storm related to the infusion of these cells. But overall, we knew how to handle these problems, right? And we said, well, at best we cure her, and in the worst case, we will not do much, right? But we will probably not harm her that much. And these were the considerations. So it's always a pro and con, right? And we were actually lucky also that the patient understood her problem, her desperate situation, and she really wanted to do something on it, right? So I would say it was quite an entrepreneurial patient, right? She didn't accept her disease. She just said, "Okay, I want to do something to get cured," and then we had an extremely good team, right? We had a hemat-oncologist who was in cell therapy, Andreas Mackensen, who was in cell therapy for years, right? In oncology. And it was very important that the two of us came together, right, to discuss this case in extenso. And that was actually the start and why we could do that. And in Germany, we have actually a quite interesting law that a patient who has a life-threatening disease and where all the therapy fails, and if there is a scientific rationale to implement a new therapy, this can be done, right? So there's actually a right for the patient, right, not to die, but to do something against it, which is pretty cool, right? And we exactly used that, right? And that was actually possible without any high bureaucratical hurdles to go into that. And then a big advantage was that we had produced cells by ourselves, right? Because pharmaceutical industry would not have given us the CAR T-cell product at this time, because they would have feared that if the patient gets a serious problems, they would jeopardize their own market for the CAR T-cell product, right? So it was not possible. The funny thing that later, when the first patients were treated, all the pharmaceutical industry jumped onto that, right? And now there are all of these, all the industry are doing actually CAR T-cell trials in autoimmune diseases. So it opened basically the bottle for new treatments.
You were talking about before about teamwork. What do you think about like this collaboration in between science and pharmacy and clinicians? Like, which challenges are there in this interaction?
You mean the interaction between academics and industry, most likely? Yeah. Well, I
And
think
clinicians,
and
the three of
clinicians.
them.
Yeah. Well, I think it's principally can be done very well, right? It just takes a little time and bureaucratic hurdles, which you have to overcome. But industry, especially biotech, has a lot of power, right? And to link biotech and big pharma with university institutions is extremely important, right? Because that allows actually to start first in human trials, early phase 1 trials. It's particularly also interesting to do investigator-initiated trials because the investigators sometimes know what would be the best disease, what would be the biggest unmet need in a disease. So they actually can shape appropriate trials and link trials with the science, right? Because the science is also interesting. How does the immune system change? What kind of analysis you're doing to show, for instance, that the immune system resets after a therapy? So this is extremely nice. So to basically work with the tools of biotech or big pharma and having academic ideas, scientific ideas, this combination is extremely strong. I think it takes sometimes a little bit longer breath, right? Because you have to overcome some bureaucratic hurdles. But we have actually made very good experience in the last decade in this kind of collaborative work.
You also had a research stay in industry, if I remember correctly,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
What did you learn during this stay? And do you apply what you learned there currently in your work?
Yes, has been a long time ago. It was actually in 2004, and I spent a year at Amgen, which is a big pharma company in California, in Thousand Oaks, and I went there as a as a scientist, and it was actually a full staff member of Amgen for a year, which was an interesting experience because I worked actually in kind in a totally different environment, right? Because everything is possible. You have a lot of you don't have to write a grant to do an experiment, right? You just do the experiment, which was amazing. And I actually worked there to understand how arthritis influences bone. So it's how arthritis destroys joints. That was my idea, and I worked with them because they had very interesting molecules to protect bone from destruction. And that was, for me, it was scientifically interesting. But then it was always also very interesting to dive into another environment, to learn about another environment. How does industry work? What is their preclinical research? How they define actually targets or how do they develop actually early products? And so that was super interesting, and I also can only recommend scientists to go into this to allow them to spend some time in industry. It's very helpful. And you don't need to. I didn't stay in industry then, right? It's not that you go to industry and you always you stay in industry forever. You can also go to industry for some time and go back to academia, which is also possible, right? And I think there are a lot of opportunities which are not used that much, which is sad, right? Because I think there's a lot of interest also from biotech and big pharma for good scientists, for spending some time there. They are often called at incubators, right? Some of the big pharma made incubators where scientists can rotate into industry, actually leverage their products and tools, right, to do science, which is also, I think, very helpful.
Specifically, I would like to go like a bit deeper on this, what you were mentioning about non-scientific skills that we can learn in other different fields whenever we have these kind of experiences. Which ones does non-scientific skills you consider that are important for scientists to develop?
Well, I think it's I think there are a lot of levels, right? I mean, first is this collaborative thinking, right? So basically, I think in industry you have higher collaborative thinking, because the success is not that to publish a paper. The success is actually to develop something transformational, a transformational product, right? And basically this is a much longer perspective in a way, right? And to develop something for society, not just a research paper, right? And I think therefore you need much more collaborative efforts, and you need different people with different skills working together, right? It's partly also in science, but it's very strong, I think, in an industrial setting. So that was very helpful for me to learn, and I also try to implement that in academia, that we think as a group, right, as a department, and develop cool ideas with the help of different people, and each of them get their share, right? So I think that's something which I found very important. And then, yeah, I think at the end it's personal respect, collaborative spirit. I think these are some skills one always improves when you go to different places, right? And also to see a different environment, right? That's also to go out of the box of your own research field is I think sometimes important. I mean, I think it creates, I think, a broader vision, and it allows you at the end to shape different research ideas, right?
You mentioned that papers are not the primary goal, but you also managed to have very successful publications in high impact journals, and you're also among the most cited researchers. And do you have any advice for successful paper writing, how to make it comprehensive and high quality?
Yeah, I think we have too many papers, right? Nobody reads. That's the main problem nowadays. We have based on the digitalization of journals, where it's actually very profitable to run a journal. You don't have to print or the journal. You don't have to send it around. Right? It's like it's very profitable. Therefore, the number of journals increased massively, right? And the number of papers increased massively. So it's not difficult to publish a paper nowadays. Yeah, you can publish basically everything. But the problem is, do the people read it and cite it, right? So basically, the important thing is what you want with a paper. You want to inform the scientific community about something new, which is true, right? And which can be reproduced and changes the thinking. That's the critical point of a paper. So what is important then? It's important to think before you do the first experiment. What's the plan, right? What's actually my goal? What do I want to show? And is this what I want to show, an original idea, right? That's super critical. It's not should not be a Me Too project. So to carefully review the literature and have combined with a good idea, that's, I think, very important. And it makes and only if this is present to start, right? Because then there's always a risk in a research project that they may not work, but at least it gives you a chance that you find something which is new, and then you can also publish that easier in a higher quality journal. And then I think it's important to tell a story in the paper, right? it's important to tell when the reviewer, all the reviewers are busy people now. They see a paper, and if they read an abstract which fascinates them, they probably say, wow, that's interesting. I'm happy to review that. And they have a positive spirit going into the review. And then if they look at the figures and they understand the figures and the text matches to the figures and tells a story, they are probably happy, right? And they probably judge in a constructive way rather than a destructive way, right? And I think these are important things. So the original idea, the novelty is critical at the very beginning, but then actually to sell it as a story, right? That's very clear, based on data, of course. It's not a fairy tale, yeah, but it's a story based on data the reader can understand, and the reviewer is also a reader. What does the reviewer do? She or he reads the paper, right? And usually they read first the abstract. First, do they understand it? And then they look at the figures. And that's the next question. Do they understand the figures? Do they know the story? So that's what I can basically in a nutshell recommend a young scientist writing a paper.
Thank you. That's super helpful.
And you were mentioning about a lot of amount of data that we have currently now available. And it's usually a challenge for all of us in science to stay updated. How do you manage this growing of the information, and how do you approach to this to stay updated?
Yeah, that's basically, it's almost impossible now. And but I think you can. I mean, in a certain field, you can actually screen regularly the publications, and it's for me quite interesting to see that there's a lot of meta data. Right, many publications are not original publications; they use other data or reviews, for instance. So that's also important, that focusing on original science is, I think, very critical, and focusing on quality, right? I mean, that's I tend to read on or select articles I read which are published in the higher quality journals, right? That's because otherwise I think you cannot oversee that. And then, of course, for the writing of the for when you write a paper, you have to make an additional second screen, right? Check what happens in the meantime, and to basically write a good discussion to put your data in perspective of the literature. But in principle, I think one has to be focused on the research project to screen the literature. Otherwise, it's just too much.
My next question is about challenges. What approaches help you push through the toughest scientific challenges? How do you approach a problem?
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, I think when you have an original idea, you have to defend it also, right? Because sometimes people will say, "Oh, it's probably not possible. That's not good. That's not mainstream." At the end, you have to just defend it. Yeah, you have to be. I think that's also, I think, when I discuss with young scientists, I'm very happy if they come up with ideas, and then we discuss that, and then of course it's need to be some kind of feasibility needs to be there, right? And the clear concept. But one should be always open-minded, right? Also, as a senior physician or senior scientist, one has to be open-minded. One comes from junior scientist and say, well, maybe that's good, right? And the other thing is also to believe in data, right? To not say, well, this is the other way around, and this cannot be. But basically, one is important to look at the data, because this kind of serendipity is often extremely important, right, for really breakthrough findings. So this open-mindedness and also to defend unusual ideas, right, is very critical to find out something. That's basically the essence of science, right? You don't want to have a Me Too paper, right? Where there's incremental knowledge, and And the other, I think, aspect is endurance, right? Endurance is, I think, important. You have to be patient also a little bit in science. Without any patience, difficult. And sometimes it does not work immediately, but with thinking and you come to a breakthrough sometimes, right? I think there needs to be a little bit of frustration tolerance in science, right? And that's based on the original scientific work when you do the experiments, but then also when you want to publish it, right? I always say we are always slapped into the face over the entire life as scientists because we get reviews, if grants of papers, and we get actually punished. And so, but we have to just stand up, and the next day looks better, and then we find a solution, right? I think that's part of the job, and I think one has to accept that, right? When you do science, it's not straightforward often, right? And you need endurance. Yeah. So if you do good sports or so, you might cope with that better. And because endurance in sport is probably helping you to be endurant in science.
Now, changing a bit of topic and considering what you've just said about sport, um, how do you currently navigate the demands of a high-profile scientific career while maintaining a healthy work-life balance?
Yes, I don't like, personally, I'm not a big fan of the work-life balance, right? Because it always says that work is not life. So for me, work was always part of the life. And if you think that you you spend a lot of time with your work, if you don't think that's life, it's very sad at the end, right? But I can uncouple myself quite well. I make holidays, probably more than other people do, and then recover then, and then I'm happy to go to work, right? I have never had a day where I was unhappy to go to work. I'm just happy that I can do that. I'm always very thankful with my work because it's a creative work, so I'm always in a very privileged situation to be a physician scientist because it's a very creative work. So I'm always happy to do it. Well, it's often a lot of work, but it's always a lot of fun also, right? I'm exposed to intelligent people. I can discuss a lot. It's good for my mind, for my mindset. But of course, you need sometimes recovery from it, right? And you need travel to see something, to make some sports. This is extremely important. And then it's, I think, also important for the work, right? Because you see something different, and that's very critical. So I always had this, and I always give myself protected time, right? I'm also not the slave of others, right? Which is also important, not to be the slave of the emails, right? I think I always say that my work is not to answer all the emails I get every day. I drive people nuts with that, but that's how it is, right? Because my life is not actually fulfilled if I answer all the emails every day, right? That's just reacting to the surrounding. You have to create your own place, right? And you be the master of yourself, not actually just fulfilling demands of others. And that becomes more and more important, right? If you cannot handle that, you burn out immediately, right? That's the danger is to burn out if people think they have to do everything super precisely and everything 100%. You just burn out immediately today. Because it's just so much more what comes to you, right? From all sides, that you have to have develop a certain resilience to this situation.
Next to resilience and also patience that you mentioned earlier, what do you think, which skills do young researchers need in order to be successful in the field of immunology or rheumatology?
Well, I think the young researchers come from different fields, right? Some of them are MDs, and the MDs have always the intrinsic difficulty that the med school has become more and more a school, right? Like a true school where you have a very strict timetable, and you don't have much time for science, right? And personally, I think it's always good when you want to do science that you have an early exposure to science, right? Already in the med school. That's very helpful through, for instance, a thesis and protected time in a thesis. Also, it is not important if you finish med school 1 year early or later, right? I studied 1 year longer because I went to a lab and got skills. I learned something else, and that was very helpful later for me. So I think for MDs, it's very important to have an early exposure to science. Now there are a lot of physician scientist programs in institutions, which are really helpful to have protected time for science. We are actually very much engaging in physician scientist program to allow actually doctors at different levels of their career to be more in science. And now, and then I think it's very important for MDs that they have an institution where science is valued, right? Where actually the institution allows you to have a scientific part of your life, not only seeing enormous numbers of patients, right, in a routine. And then for PhDs, I think it is. I think it's very critical for them to have a good thesis, right, and have actually an inspirational environment during the thesis, to have a good project. This is, I think, super critical. And then goes along usually with good quality publications, which I think is the currency to get a job later, right? Because also for PhD, it's not so easy to get jobs as postdocs later, and the currency is a good publication or a good lab. What I think is also helpful if young postdocs actually then go to another institution, right, to go out of their comfort zone, to go to another institution, learn something new, learn new technologies, improve the skills, and become then and go to the level of a PI. Because at the end, I think the next critical step for a PhD is actually to write a successful research application where the person is PI, right? This is absolutely critical, because without that, there is no scientific career anymore possible. Now you need to have a research application where you are PI, and that's often then linked to quite good papers in the thesis, right? So that's basically the initial, I would say, the initial trajectory of a physician scientist and a PhD, what I framed here.
And as an advice for young PIs, what are some common mistakes that new researcher leaders should avoid when establishing and maintaining a research group?
At the very early moment of a research group, when you just start, it should be very flat hierarchy, right? It's a very participative style, right? Because at the end, it's like in a company, right? When the companies are very small, everybody does everything, right? It's not that they have a different department. So when you are a group of 3 or 4, really you have to work intensively together, right? That's absolutely critical. Have a flat hierarchy, and really work together in 1 or 2 focus projects, right? That's very critical. What is also, I personally, I think is important that what is the publication strategy, right? For instance, it's very important that students get the possibility to be first author, and the young PI becomes last author, right? I always looked for that, right? That because that improves enormously the career of people, right? When it's, I think, a very difficult if in an institution the senior person or institution head is always last author, which actually makes then the young PI to be first author, and the student doesn't get their first authorship, right? So we always looked for that actually young PIs have their showing their independence by being senior author, and the person who is actually doing then the experiments, the student is first author. So that improves the the career of the student and of the PI, right? Because at the end, success of young PIs will be very much seen by the fact, could they do an independent work, which means that they are senior author, corresponding author, right? That's very critical for further evaluations. For instance, in the German Research Council, this is a very critical point, which distinguishes a postdoc from a PI. The PI has his own research, right, and is responsible for this research. And that's why what is actually how you measure that. Well, when you don't know these people, how they work, you measure that by looking who is senior author on the paper. So these are small things which are extremely important for career development, I would say.
And when we look at current new technologies, for example, social media or AI, how do you think can they benefit or challenge research nowadays?
Well, I think it becomes data science becomes more important now also in life science, right? Because usually the life science projects are often using omics technologies, producing large amounts of data, right? That's why data scientists usually become more important in life science, and there are different models how to integrate data scientists into the life science. One has actually a kind of a core facility, or others have embedded data scientists into research group, which are closer than to the research group or to the questions. So this becomes more critical, and also, of course, in this context, artificial intelligence. Then the other component is how does artificial intelligence actually influence publications, right? That's also another, I think, rapidly changing field. And I would think this will more and more come, right? That paper are written with the help of artificial intelligence. That doesn't mean that the artificial intelligence writes the entire paper, but I think it can improve. I personally, interesting, don't do that, right? But I think that will come more and more. That actually, basically, the scientist writes actually the paper, and then they basically, with the help of artificial intelligence, it will be refined. You just have to basically declare it that you have done it, right? Often now with journals, you see the question: did this paper was this paper written by with the help of artificial intelligence? And then you have to click it, and so. But it's all about transparency. But I would say that it's probably not reasonable to think that artificial intelligence doesn't play any role in text production in the future, right? That's absolutely impossible to think. This will come, but it has to be declared, and it has to be also the scientist has to know that there is not 100% trust of what the artificial intelligence proposes you in text writing, that you have to also check it for plausibility, of course.
Definitely. And what is the most valuable career advice you've received that you would like to pass on the next generation for researchers?
Yeah, find a good mentor. That's, I think, the most important thing. An inspirational person, right? I think that's very critical. You said one. That's the one.
Yeah. Fair enough. Fair enough. Thank you very much. What challenges and which opportunities do you see for the next generation of scientists in immunology?
Well, I think there are huge opportunities always, right? I mean, science is a very nice work. It's actually creative, right? It's and science cannot be done. Scientists cannot be replaced so easily by artificial intelligence, right? Because of course, artificial intelligence can propose science questions, right? And so that's all possible. But I think it's a job which is very um, um, creative, and I think that's why I think young people should be open to science, right? I think it's always important in what kind of context they do science, right? Science is not only in academic context, it can be also in industrial context, right? Which is, I think, also important. I mean, and also I think what you see that the successful postdocs and then switch to industry or to biotech, right? So I think that's also an interesting. There are many career approaches, I think, as a scientist, right? It's not just to be in academia.
And slowly we are coming to an end. We would like to hear a standout moment from your career, perhaps something lighthearted or surprising, out of the ordinary, something that comes to mind that you would feel comfortable sharing with us.
Well, that's a good one. I think I was always fascinated by new data, right? I mean, I never like to write grants because it's a must do, but I am always like a child where there is some new toy and so and there is new data. This makes me completely happy, right? And it's a little bit like you are in a sandbox as a small boy in my case, or small girl in your case, right? Playing with the things and finding something new, and that is these eureka moments, which were going through my career from time to time, not to that often, right? Sometimes you find data, okay, yeah, but sometimes say wow, and that's actually what you wish to have, and I think that keeps you happy over the years. And I hope some will come in the future, right? You never can predict them, but I'm sure that this will happen. So that's actually what I think is important. You have to really live emotionally with this job. Without these emotions, it's not good, right? I think you really need to believe in it and live with it. And I think that's what I want to give the young scientists, right? You really need to be fully into it, and then it makes you happy.
Well, that's the wrap for today's episode of Climbing the Immune Ladder, Steps for Success in Science, IISIAR podcast. A huge thank you, Professor Georg Schett, for sharing his insights, stories, and experiences with us. We hope you found this conversation as inspiring and thought-provoking as we did. If you enjoyed the episode, don't forget to join us on the next episode and share it with anyone who might benefit from it. You can also follow us on our webpage to stay updated on the future episodes and in community updates. Thank you for listening, and remember, persistence and asking the right questions are what drive science, and maybe even our own journey. Until next time, stay curious.